All right, let's continue on with the texturing process for the Katana. Next, we're going to tackle the wrapping here. So for this part, I'm going to provide a texture along with normal map to make this part go along a little quicker. So let's go ahead and create a group up here. And we're going to name this group wrapping 1. We're going to have several different ones. That'll make more sense when we get to that part. Within this first folder, let's go ahead and create a black mask. And let's go into mask mode and mask out some of these wrappings. And because we have mirrored UVs for most of these pieces, right? This piece right here has our UVs in the 0 to 1, so I really only have to mask this one area. We want to move in here a little closer too. We've got these other pieces in here, so we want to make sure we grab all of that. Can be a little tough to grab these. They're very small. Just move around it. Make sure we're getting everything. Okay, that looks pretty good. Looks like we missed this. And this right here. Okay, so after we have all that, let's exit mask mode. And let's bring in our textures we're going to use for this banding, wrapping. Go ahead and import those textures, add resources, and let's go to our root directory here, and I'm going to come to our textures folder. And you should be able to download this fabric diffuse and fabric normal map. So let's go ahead and grab both of those. And let's go ahead and make sure they're importing as textures and to our project directory. Okay, after we have those, let's go ahead and create a fill layer. We'll drop that in there. And right here under base color, we're going to put our fabric diffuse. And I'll do the same for our normal map here in the normal map slot. Okay, and you'll notice it comes in with the UVs scaled pretty small, so we're going to increase our scale. Something like, let's see what 10 gives us. Let's try 12. And it kind of gets a little lost there. I think 10 will probably work for us. Another problem we have is you notice the texture is a little too bright compared to the reference. Go ahead and bring up the reference real quick. And see it's more of a darker brown color. Let's go ahead and try to get a closer look to that. So what I'm going to do is go up here to our effects drop down. I'm going to add a levels. And then what we want to do is switch it to RGB. We're going to pull these sliders around until we get a darker look going on here. I might pull this down a little bit. See if we pull that direction. You just really kind of want to play with these. That's kind of an interesting result. Reads more of like a more of like a leather. Not quite like the reference though, however. Yeah, kind of liking that color. Let's see if we can add. Let's go back into our colors here. It's gonna brighten it. And this is just you just kind of want to play around here a little bit until you get the effect you're after. I'm gonna keep it on that. Also gonna see if we can add, a hue saturation. Let's go ahead and add a filter. I'm gonna see if we can find a filter that'll work for us. We have color correction. Maybe a color balance. Pull the reds back. See if that's really. Let's go into our midtones here. Yeah, it's really not doing much for us here. You know, come to think of it, it might be easier to kind of get this texture closer in Photoshop. So let's go ahead and open this file back up into Photoshop. So we got our fabric diffuse here. And I'm going to throw a hue saturation on here and also a levels. These are our adjustment layers. Let's start by adjusting our levels. Going a little darker. That makes it very vibrant. Let's go ahead and pull this hue saturation above here. I'm going to pull some of the saturation out in it. And can actually maybe even just darken it a little bit like so. Maybe that's a little too much. Let's see what kind of result we get with this. So I'm going to go ahead and save this as a JPEG, and we'll call this Fabric 2. Jump back into Substance Painter, and let's import in that texture. Sure we specify what the texture is going to be used for. And let's just drop that back into our fill layer here. And we're going to remove these filters we had applied. And that's still a little too bright. So let's go ahead and add back a levels adjustment and kind of just refine it from this point. If we can, that darkens it. Looks pretty good like that, I think. And so we have a problem now with our, see if we, as we move our light around, it's a little too specular. So let's go into our parameters for that. What we want to adjust is our roughness. So we want to make sure that, so as we bring this value up, we can see it kind of becomes a little bit more less reflective. We do want a little bit of light hitting it, so let's kind of move the light around and see how it's reacting. That might be a little too much. I'm going to keep pulling it this way. Okay, that looks pretty good. Let's take a look from it from here. And let's also double check our reference. So that one's a little, there's a little bit more vibrance to it. It's pretty close though. I think we'll go with this. It looks pretty good. All right, so we've got that figured out. And we want to make sure that our texture is applying properly. And on some of these, because our UVs are rotated to fit in the 0 to 1 space better for us, they're going to be a little off, so we're going to have to adjust those manually. So let's go ahead and duplicate our wrapping 1 layer here. Hit Control D to do that. Let's go ahead and rename that to wrapping 2. Let's re-enter our mask, or actually let's clear a mask. I'm going to add a black mask. Go into mask mode here, and I'm going to select this unique wrapping here. Let's go ahead and just start selecting a few of these pieces. And let's just take a look at how that's projecting on here. So we've got this part right here That's wrong. So let's go back into that and deselect that piece. We'll have to address that as its own layer. And for the rest of these three, they're going to be fine. So we just need to make sure we select these pieces. So let's make sure we're working out of a white and grab those pieces. Okay. This one's a little tough to grab. And one thing we could have done too, which is pretty common, is we could have made a duplicate of these wrappings, moved them over to the side, and that would have been a lot easier to kind of pick these polygons that are tough to grab when they're modeled like this. Like one, for instance, right here, I'm having an issue getting to. See if I can get it. Oh, that's the wrong part. The one thing you also could do, see if we might be able to get it from here. Yeah, it's going to allow us to get it from there. All right, so we got that piece. But another thing you could do is you could go into Max and just isolate these UVs and see where they correspond to, and then you could jump into your 2D view here and then just select those pieces on this from this picture. So let's go back into 3D view and let's turn it back into material mode. Let's make a duplicate of this and let's address this piece right here. So I'll make this wrapping 3 and let's clear a black mask and go back into mask mode and we'll mask this item right here. If we got everything, looks pretty good. All right. So on this piece, we need to readjust the UV rotation on it. So what we'll do is click on our fill here, scroll up a little bit, and just rotate this 90 degrees. And that fixes that part. All right, so we've got those pieces done. Let's go ahead and duplicate this one more time. Rename this to 4. Fill this with a black mask. Enter mask mode, and let's see if we can get this piece and this piece together. All right. Just see if let's just select that. I just want to see how that's going to respond. Now let's go ahead and, it's like this is going to need to be its own piece as well. I think what we'll do is for this one, switch back to a black. Deselect these pieces here, and we'll just leave that as its own individual one. And let's go ahead and duplicate this. Double check. Yeah, it looks fine. And let's go ahead and make a mask for this object here. Make sure we make a black mask there. Got all the pieces there. Let's go ahead and go to our UVs here. And we have a rotation of 90. We just want to remove that. Bring it back to 0. And this piece we did right here just wasn't modeled very well. If you want to look at some reference, this should all kind of be knotted kind of on itself where it wraps together. So I'd suggest maybe revisiting that to get more of a look that's closer to the reference. Let's go ahead and do this last piece here. Let me rename this to 5. And we can go ahead and just duplicate this. Control D. Add a black mask. And let's select this piece right here. I feel like we're going to have an issue with this piece. Just see what kind of result we get here. Should have grabbed everything. Yeah, so we've got kind of our UVs kind of going all different directions on this one. So what I think I'll do, we'll just make a selection here for this piece. So let's go ahead, fill this again with a black mask. And let's grab just this part. Maybe the rim. These inner pieces. Go ahead and check that again. We need to rotate that 90 degrees. And let's go ahead and select these other pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this first. Go ahead and duplicate this again. I have quite a lot of layers for this part. Wrapping 7. Fill that with a black mask, and let's select this piece here and this piece. I just want to see. Yeah, so that's a little off. So we're going to need that one a different color. Deselect that piece. Then come into our properties here and rotate that back to 0. Let me double check. Can we get, nice to get this here too. That's not going to work for us there. However, I think we can match this one up with that. So I'm going to go ahead back into here. Make sure this is black on his side. And let's go back to the layer that's controlling the texture here. See, we'll turn it on and off. Go back into our mask and make sure that that's masked white on this side here. That clears up that. Now we're just left with this piece in here. So we'll just address that one separately. We go ahead and add a black mask, easy for me to say, and make this white. Jump out of that. And let's adjust its UVs to 90. Alright, so that takes care of the wrapping. So next we're going to go in and start texturing this inner part of the grip. Alright, let's continue on with texturing the bone pattern behind the handle here. So let's go ahead and jump into Photoshop real quick. So here's a reference image, kind of a close-up shot of those bone chips. And so what I ended up doing was creating some vector shapes of these bone shapes, and then from there imported them into Max, where I was able to build out the geometry to look like this using that ZBrush workflow. And then after we had this geometry built, I very similar to how we did the flower, I just projected this high poly geometry onto a plane to build out a normal map that we can work from to texture that particular part of the handle. So let's go ahead and open that file up real quick. Go into Photoshop here. under our textures folder here. This guy right here, and I'll be providing this image that you can use for your own project. And now we're to the point where we need to set everything up and jump into Mudbox to texture the handle. So I'm going to go ahead and go into Max here. Let's go open up our main scene with our Katana. Taking a bit of time to open here. And we just want to grab all the pieces of the handle here. So I'm going to grab that piece, and that piece, that piece, and this piece. Go ahead and isolate to see what pieces we have here. Jump out here real quick. Okay, that's right. It's a little hard to see with this blue color mapped on here. Let's grab these pieces. They should be selected. Go up to Max here and Export Selected. And that'll bring us to our project directory here. Make sure that we're under our Mudbox folder, and we're going to go to our import folder, and let's go ahead and just export the handle. We'll export it as handle obj. Go ahead and replace that one I had currently. Hit done, and I already have this open. I'm going to go ahead and start with a new scene, and let's go ahead and import in that handle. It's going to prompt you with this message, and that's because we have triangles in our geometry. So just go ahead and say keep all. And now we have that in our scene. Let's next go to our object list, and let's grab the main grip low and duplicate that. It's going to put it down here for us. And then these next, the three objects we just imported in, we're just going to use as a template. So what I want to do is lock those layers so we don't paint on them. And now we have kind of a basis to texture this. So the next thing I'm going to do is come down here to our stencils and load in that custom normal map stencil. So this bone pattern 5. And then from there, it looks like I already had it. Yeah, so I had it in my scene. In your case, it should just import in, and so it's right here. And we'll go ahead and let's not quite activate that. Let's set this up so we're viewing this right. Let's go ahead and hit our space bar, come to this grid part, grid button, and switch our view to a side view. And we're going to use a similar method as we did with the tempering waving pattern on the blade. So we're working from a side view now, and I'm going to go ahead and go to our layers. Let's create a new paint layer. Make sure it's 4K. Hit OK to that, and let's activate our projection. So just click that button right there, and then also come down here and activate our stencil again. And let's go ahead and scale this down to the correct size. And you want to make sure you have a little bit of overlap, because when we flood this texture in here, we want to make sure that we have the texture kind of getting behind these cracks right here. Otherwise it'll look a little strange in your in the texture work. So something about like that, give or take. And then let's click on the projection to bring up our options for that. And we're just going to flood camera, and that's going to place our texture where we need it here. So we're just going to kind of go down the line now and repeat the steps. So flood camera. It'd be kind of nice to maybe map this to a hotkey so you don't have to keep moving over to the right to click that. So I'm going to go ahead and speed up the video right now to a point where I've textured this one side. We're going to have to repeat the process again on the other side, unfortunately, because it's not a mirrored UV. But this is pretty straightforward. Just go ahead and move and flood camera. So I'll go ahead and speed up the film right now. All right, so at this point we're ready to move to the next side, so I'm just going to hit the block up here to rotate around, and we're going to need to reposition our stencil to match the angle we have going on here. So for this part it'd be easier just to kind of rotate off of this one, get it scaled up where it needs to be, and then reposition it. So I'm going to go ahead and speed it up again here to texture this part. Okay, so now when we get to this part, we're going to have to do a little bit of masking when we get into Photoshop so that this surface doesn't receive the bone chip effect. Let's go ahead and get this in the position roughly, and just go ahead and flood the camera there. And so now we have our normal map detail. Let's go ahead and just double check our texture work on that. I'm going to turn these layers off, so we're just looking at the maps. Let's go ahead and also turn our stencil off and deselect it. Let's jump out of orthographic view into perspective view and rotate around it. Should have something that looks similar to this. And so from here, we're going to go to our layers and export this out as a file. So let's go ahead and export selected. We'll save over this one. And let's jump into Photoshop here. So we're going to the right directory here. Okay, so we have a file like this. And what's nice about this file is we have a transparency behind our normal map, which will make it very easy to do the diffuse texture. That'll make a little more sense when we get to that point. I'm going to go ahead and remove this little section here that doesn't need to be there. All right, and let's go ahead and jump back into Max here. And so this area, if you recall, we have a little bit of that bone pattern coming through. But I want to export our UVs so that we can address that area. Let's go ahead and just load that up. I'm going to go up here to Tools and Render UV Template. Change this to 4096 by 4096 and render a UV template. And let's put that in our export folder. And I'll just replace the one I have here, so handle UV. And you can save this out however you want. I'll save it as a targa in this case. Let's go back into Photoshop, load up that snapshot. And if you hit Control-I on your keyboard, that's going to invert the image. Gives us a nicer image to overlay on top of our bone pattern. And let's go ahead and duplicate that layer to our bone pattern out PNG file. I'm going to place that right on top. Then I'm going to change its blend mode to overlay, and now we can kind of see the UVs over top of our normal map. So you just want to remove this section of the bone chips. I'm going to grab my rectangle tool, selection tool, and just use the UVs as a guide, and just remove that section. And I don't know what that just did. That didn't do what I wanted it to. I think I fat fingered a key. So let's go ahead and do that. We can remove our UVs because we no longer need them. And that's going to do it for the normal map for that. So let's go ahead and duplicate this over to our normal map file. Make sure it's over there correctly. All right. And let's go ahead and just leave that there for right now. Let's focus on the diffuse texture now. I'm going to close some of the stuff we don't need. Okay. So I want to actually let's bring this image into this file. I'm just going to copy and paste that in. And now what we want to do is create our diffuse texture. So in order to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and group this and so we don't destroy our normal map layer. So we've got a diffuse, or this should be normal, sorry. Let's go ahead and duplicate that and rename it to diffuse. And let's turn off the normal layer. And now we're left with the same image, but we're going to rework this to be our diffuse. The first thing I want to do is come in here and I want to sample this color we have going on here for the background behind the bone chips. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my color picker, make sure we're not working in web colors, check that off, and select this color right here. And I might just kind of pull a little saturation out of it and drop it down to be a little darker than the actual reference. Somewhere maybe around here. And then from here, let's go down to our layer styles and create a solid color. That's going to put in that color we just sampled where we need it. And let's pull that below our layer 0 there. And so here on our layer 0, which is our normal map for our bone chips, we're going to reuse this for our diffuse. So let's go ahead and left click on this. It's going to bring up our layer style. And we're going to throw a color overlay on top of that. And let's go ahead and sample a color here on the bone. Something about like that, and maybe kind of make it a little brighter. Somewhere around there. Like that. And then we're going to go into our inner shadow. We're going to drop the distance to 0. Change the blend mode to normal. Turn our opacity to 100%. And click the swatch icon again. And we're going to sample this darker color on the side. And then maybe really readjust this a little bit down to be darker. And then let's increase our size here a little bit. And it's a little too soft, so I'm going to increase the choke. We reduce the size again. And we should actually, I'm going to hit OK to that. And I want to just kind of zoom in here to kind of see our changes being applied. Go back to our inner shadow. Let's increase the choke a little bit. Pull back the size. Until we're left with something like that. So we're sort of recreating what we have going on here. Of course, there's some translucency things, effects that we can't really accomplish here in our diffuse map. One thing you could do to kind of strengthen this diffuse map a little more is add like a grunge layer on top of this, like overlay it to kind of break up the uniformity of the color. But for right now, we're just going to leave it as it is. And I'm going to turn this reference image off and save this out as our diffuse. So we can save this one as a targa. Should we go to our substance temp folder here, and I'll go ahead and save over what was here. We have so let's save it as bone pattern underscore diffuse. Okay, and next we need to create a roughness map, which is going to control how the highlights appear on the surface of this material. So we'll go ahead and duplicate our diffuse layer here. Let's rename it to roughness. Let's turn our diffuse layer off here. And now we're just going to readjust this to work as a roughness map. So first thing I'm going to do is kind of make this a white more of a whitish color. And so the way a roughness map works is areas that are brighter are going to be less reflective, and areas that are black are going to receive more reflective values. So let's go ahead and leave that the way it is, and let's go back to our bone chip layer here and readjust this. So let's make this more of a darker color. We go about, make it fairly reflective. It is a very reflective surface. And then for our inner shadow, we're going to want to maybe just go for something a little, or maybe in like the 50% gray range. Okay. And that's going to do it for our roughness map. And I'm going to go ahead and save this, the Targa, or substance temp folder. Save over this current one here. And now let's go back to our normal map. Let's finalize this. So let's go ahead and go to layer, flatten image. And let's go ahead and save this image now. Okay, that's saved. Let's go into our substance. And let's start by, actually we can import all of this together. Be a lot easier. So I'm going to go to add resources here. I'm going to select our bone diffuse, roughness, and the normal map. And make sure these are all set to texture. And importing into our project directory. And that kind of conveniently places those there for us to use. So I'm going to first start by replacing our mesh map, normal map. Throw that in there, and you'll see the bone normal map being applied there. Next, we need to create a material for our bone material, and I'm going to start by creating a group. Call it bone chips. And inside of that, we'll add a fill layer. And for our base color, we're going to pull over our diffuse map. And one thing we forgot to do is mask this off. So let's go to our, let's right click on the group and add a black mask. And make sure we're in UV chunk. And let's go in mask mode here and select those pieces. Make sure those pieces on that side are selected. And we know that we don't want these polygons selected because we're going to make this section of polygons that bronze material. So I'm going to switch over to polygon fill. I'm going to go switch this to black as well so we can deselect this white color. I'm going to select a few of these so we know where that is in our UV map. So we'll switch over to a 2D view of our texture. And that's this area right here. So now I'm just going to drag over those polygons and make them black. Okay. Let's jump back into a 3D view here and jump out of mask mode. And we should have our bone chips in place where they need to be. And they look pretty good. They read fairly well from this distance. So next we're going to focus on the buttstock and get that textured. And I think after we do that, that's going to complete this video. All right, before we continue with the buttstock, I noticed that I missed one thing while we were texturing this, the bone chips here. If we go into our bone chips layer, let's go ahead and open that. I forgot to add the roughness, so go ahead and make sure that you pull your roughness map into the roughness slot here. Also, we can get a little bit more we kind of scroll back and forth here. You see it has a little bit of reflective properties. I was able to achieve that just by bumping up my metallic value to about 0.08. Go beyond that, it's just going to be a little too reflective and non-realistic. And actually, that might be a little too much. Might even bump that down to 0.05 just to get a little bit of a highlight there. And that'll finish that piece off. So let's go ahead and focus on the buttstock here. Let's jump into Photoshop for this. Go ahead and save this and close it. That's a good point. Make sure you, all these textures that we're generating, it's always a good idea to create a PSD of those so we have a backup if we ever want to go back and readjust those. So I'm going to go ahead and close that now. We close this, we don't need that anymore. And I'm going to go ahead and navigate to a texture that I created. And I'll be providing this, the description. And it's this right here, this wave pattern. We're just going to go ahead and we can actually work from this. So first thing we're going to do, and actually I think I'm going to provide the grayscale image so you can go through the process of generating the normal map from this, because it's kind of good to learn that process. So I'm going to go ahead and select everything here, and let's do a copy merge. And I'm going to go ahead and paste that into our normal map file. And before we do our normal map filter, I'm going to get this roughly into place. This piece right here, that's our buttstock. So I'm going to go ahead and reduce this opacity a little bit. We can see through it a little easier. And just scale it down into place. We want to make sure we have a little bit of this texture kind of over these edges, somewhere about like that, and then try to center it as best you can in here. So maybe somewhere about here. And then I'm going to go ahead and scroll in here, and I'll just go ahead and grab the path tool, and we're going to use that. Actually, before we do that, let's go ahead and convert it to a normal map. So turn our opacity back up to 100%. And then from here, we're just going to make sure we're on the layer with our grayscale height map. Go up here to filter, NVIDIA tools, or in some cases, the 3D filter. And just go ahead and convert that. And let's see here. And one thing that I noticed when I was doing some of this texture work is this height map that it generates, or the normal map it's generating, is actually inverting the channel incorrectly, at least in Substance Painter. If we were doing this for Marmoset or where we're going to be outputting to, this would have been fine. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to copy what we have here real quick and put it in a new document. Now we just have our normal map here in a new document. And I'm going to go to the channels here and flip our green channel so it looks like that. And let's jump back into RGB and copy this. And go ahead and delete the layer we had currently here. And go up to Edit, Paste, and then select Paste Special, and choose the option Paste in Place. And that didn't actually paste it where we wanted it. It's because it was in another document. I was hoping it would paste it right in here. Unfortunate that didn't happen. Alright, so let's go ahead and get this in position again. Not too hard. So maybe somewhere about here. Next, let's go ahead and just create a new path here. Let's go into our pen tool, and we just want to trace around this piece so it'll fit in there cleanly with our normal map. Let's start a Bezier curve here. We go to about here, start one. Just roughly kind of trace this shape out. And we'll just select the path here, add some points. And this doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to fit around the padding that's around this piece. Something about like that. Just fine. That's kind of coming into that piece. I'm just going to bring that in a little bit. Bring that in a little bit. All right, so that's going to work for us. So I'll make a selection from that work path. Let's click on the visibility of our layer and mask it. Next thing we're going to do is let's turn our opacity to 100%. Let's hit Control L, bring up our levels. Let's go to the blue channel and change this to 128. It's removing our blue information. And then we're going to set this to hard light. Should be left with a result like that. Okay, so from here we're just going to flatten our layer, flatten our image, and let's go ahead and save that and preview our changes. Okay, go ahead and jump into Substance Painter here. Port that normal map again. Oh, forgot to specify our texture as a texture. Kind of nice just to click that on. Let's go to our texture set settings and replace our mesh map here for the normal map. You'll see that area update. Now we have some nice relief pattern going on here. And one thing we haven't been doing is we've been looking at the document in half its resolution. So if we click this right here, go to 4K, we'll get more of a true representation of what our final texture is going to display as. It'll take a little bit of time because it's loading in all these textures. That's taking quite a bit of time. It's also loading the textures that we have on our other texture sets. So yeah, you can see our normal map's a lot cleaner when we zoom in here. Same with the banding. It's starting to shape up pretty well. So let's go ahead, let's switch this back to 4K. You never really want to work at 4K, it's just a little too sluggish. So let's go to 2K. And what I'm going to do for this buffers is I think we're just going to work from our existing, oops, excuse me, I have a sneeze coming on. We're going to go ahead and grab the material we used on these pieces because I think we could just reuse it. That way we cut down our layers. So let's go down to this bronze metal parts. I'm going to get rid of this one too. And let's go into our mask mode and go into UV chunk fill. And let's just grab this piece at first. And then next we're going to need to jump over to polygon fill. Select this piece right here, and we know from earlier when we deselected them where they are located on the UV map. Let's go in here, and we just want to select these polygons right here, edge, just like that. Okay. Let's jump back into 3D mode, jump out of mask mode. Now we have that piece completed. So that leaves one other piece that will finish off the katana, and that's the blade guard. So let's go ahead and unhide that piece. And we're going to use the same bronze material we have on these pieces. You'll notice that this has its own layers because it's its own texture set. So we're just going to simply delete this layer 1 that Substance Painter creates by default. And we're going to go to, in this case, we don't really need to create a folder because this is really only going to have one material applied to it. So I'm going to go to our Smart Material and get the bronze armor material and pull that right in. It's going to load in our texture. So we've finally completed the katana sword. I think it turned out pretty nice. If you followed along for this part, I'd love to see some of the work that you produced from it. So yeah, let's go ahead and end the video here, and in the next part, our next few videos, we're gonna texture the sheath. I'll see you there.